While it's a widely known fact that obsessive-compulsive disorder is often a comorbid condition with Asperger's or high-functioning autism, another fact that is not well known is that OCD is less prominent in individuals on the spectrum than the obsessions by themselves, kind of a OD, if you will. So what we're going to do in this section is we're going to talk about obsessive thinking in the Asperger's mind, or in the mind of the individual on the high end of autism. But before we get into obsessive thinking and what can be done about it, let's first draw the distinction between obsession versus compulsion. Now, both of these terms involve a disorder, and this may give an impression that both obsession and compulsion are alike, but actually they're considerably different. Obsession is a mental disorder that refers to the repetitive ideas or impulses in a person's mind. And although most of the time the ideas and impulses in the mind would involve a desire that is waiting to be satisfied, there are times that these ideas and impulses are unwanted, making that person with an obsession somewhat mentally unbalanced. The impulses and ideas may also be persistent. Even though the person with an obsession doesn't want to think about the particular obsession that he has, the ideas still keep popping in his mind. Also, the person with an obsession can have further problems if he refuses to think about that particular impulse or idea. Although the individual with an obsession is busy with other sorts of things, this idea or obsession would still recur, and usually it would disrupt the thinking of the individual. On the other hand, a compulsion, even though it's also a mental disorder, has more to do with action and behavior rather than thinking. Think of compulsion as the actual task that the individual performs. So while the obsession would involve impulses or ideas, a compulsion would involve the behavior based on the obsession. The person with a compulsion repeats a particular action that she is fixated on, and this repetitive action then becomes somewhat of a daily ritual for the individual with the compulsion. The person with an obsession would be comparable to a CD in a CD player, and it keeps skipping over the same spot. If the person refuses to think about that particular obsession, he can't stop because it just keeps skipping. Furthermore, if the person would refuse to think of that particular idea or impulse, he would be further disturbed, which would also result in a much more complicated mental dilemma here. On the other hand, a compulsion would be very comparable to a machine that is programmed to do the same thing over and over again. An obsession could actually result in a compulsion. For example, an individual who has a compulsion of hand washing might also be obsessed with being clean. Now, as I stated earlier, obsessing is a lot like a CD that just keeps skipping over the same spot. But it's not just any kind of thought. It's a thought that is usually related to a past event that was relationship-oriented. It's, for example, replaying an argument with a friend in your mind, retracing your past mistakes, going back and ruminating about some of the injustices that you've had to endure, and so on. When people obsess, they overthink or ruminate about situations or life events, and these could be work-related, relationship-related, family of origin-related, and so on. Now, research has shown that obsessive thinking is associated with a variety of negative emotional states. For example, depression, anxiety, and also it's associated with a lot of negative behaviors. For example, binge drinking and binge eating. So why would obsessive thinking lead to these negative outcomes? Well, for some individuals, drinking or binge eating becomes a way to cope with life and drown out their obsessive thinking. When people obsess while they're in a depressed mood, they remember more negative things that happened to them in the past. They interpret situations in their current lives more negatively, and they are just in general more hopeless about the future. Obsessive thinking also becomes the fast track to feeling helpless. Specifically, it paralyzes your problem-solving skills. You become so preoccupied with the problem that you're unable to push past the cycle of negative thoughts. It can even turn people away. When people obsess for an extended period of time, their family members and friends become frustrated, and they may pull away their support. So why do individuals on the spectrum tend to engage in more obsessive thinking than those without any form of autism? Well, some obsessive individuals may simply have more stress and anxiety in their lives, and so they're preoccupied with that. For others, it may be an issue of cognition. Some people prone to obsess have basic problems pushing things out of consciousness once they get there. So now let's shift gears and look at how the individual on the spectrum can reduce his or her obsessive thinking. And I think it goes without saying at this point that you would want to reduce obsessive thinking since it causes so many emotional and behavioral problems. There are essentially 2 steps to stop or at least minimize obsessive thinking. One of the first steps would be to problem solve. People who obsess not only replay situations in their head, they also focus on abstract questions like, why do these things happen to me? Why do I have to be in this situation? What's wrong with me that I can't cope? Why do these people mistreat me? And so on. So even if they consider solving the situation, they conclude that there's nothing that I can do about it, and so they give up. And that's a mistake. A lot of adults on the spectrum and even teenagers and perhaps even some younger children have tried to fix their social relationships. They couldn't do it and they quit trying. Okay? But if you can think clearly, you'll be able to identify at least one concrete thing that you can do to overcome the problem that you're obsessing about. For example, if you're uneasy about a situation at work, then commit to calling a close friend so that the 2 of you can brainstorm some solutions. Okay? So that is the first thing to do. Problem solve, but you're probably going to have to seek some outside assistance to get this accomplished. It could be a therapist, a pastor, a job coach. The bottom line is find someone who can help you in the task of problem solving. And the second course of action here would be to engage in activities that promote positive thoughts. You need to engage in activities that can fill your mind with other thoughts, preferably positive thoughts. That could be anything from a favorite physical activity to a hobby to meditation to prayer. The main thing is to get your mind off your obsessive thinking for a time so that it dies out and doesn't have a grip on your mind. So, another way of saying this would be find some distraction. And a lot of people on the spectrum are good at this. They engage in one activity for lengthy periods of time to the exclusion of most other activities. And this does annoy family members and so on. But what they're really doing without even knowing it is they're distracting themselves from obsessive thinking. And in this case, it's probably a good coping skill. So the first course of action, get into problem-solving mode, find somebody to help you with that. Second course of action, engage in activities that promote positive thoughts. And something that ties into this business of fostering positive thinking has to do with adaptive self-reflection. When people practice adaptive self-reflection, they focus on the concrete parts of the situation and the improvements they can make. It's a very objective versus subjective approach. For example, the person may wonder, what exactly did my boss say to me yesterday that was so upsetting to me? And then the individual can come up with a statement like, I could ask my boss to talk with me about how I could get a better performance evaluation, or I may talk to some of my coworkers and get their feedback on ways that I can improve and so on. So adaptive self-reflection, it actually ties in both the promoting of positive thinking and the problem solving here, okay? So what you're doing is you're not ruminating in the sense that you're replaying this tape in your head about how you were mistreated. Let's draw the distinction between ruminating and self-reflection. Ruminating is I'm replaying a tape of a bad event, and every time I play it, I feel even worse. And even though the event maybe only happened one time, it feels like it's happened 100 times. Self-reflection, however, is I'm going to keep my thinking positive. I'm going to get in problem-solving mode. What happened, and what can I do to go back and recruit the assistance of somebody else to problem solve such that I don't repeat this mistake in the future or run into this problem with my coworker again and so on like that. Okay? So, I hope that was helpful, and this is what a lot of individuals on the spectrum have to go through, and a lot of them don't even know that they're going through this. Many hours a day, 7 days a week, they're engaged in this ruminating that is almost a form of self-torture. But we as therapists can help you overcome this, and you also have some self-help strategies that will be very beneficial as well.